All right, I guess that means we're official. Hey, so thank you for taking the time to get on the call. I hope this is worth your while. I always admire people who are willing to invest just a little bit of time in getting better at their craft, and hopefully it makes you more productive and more confident as you go out and be the business slayers that you are. All right, start off really quickly. Just any recent wins over the past 2 weeks or interesting things that you have run across. Either one is fair game. So somebody fire off. I notice everybody except for Bunny is muted. So actually, Bunny, you know what? I'm going to use one that you primarily are dealing with over this weekend. And it's not too uncommon and it's not terribly pleasant, but it's important for us to know. So Bunny's dealing with one down in her neck of the woods with one of our agents down there on a listing that, and we'll leave names out. But the seller is unhappy. And it appears that he's at least remote, doesn't look like the home's occupied. And we just have to know, right, in our industry that we're dealing with the whole cross section of humanity. There are people that are rational. There are people that are irrational. There are people that are emotional. There are people that are logical. And we don't, that's the one thing we don't get to control is who they are, but we absolutely get to control how we are. And I have to applaud Bunny. She is like the consummate professional in dialing down somebody who maybe some of those categories I just described. But here's the key. What happens when a seller comes to you as an agent or to us as a broker, and I'm going to complicate a little bit, they're under contract with a buyer on their house, and the seller comes and says, for whatever reason, it could be, trust me, I've heard everything under the sun, I'm not happy, therefore I want out of my listing. Or worse, when they send you a message or leave you a voicemail and say, I am canceling my listing. How do we handle that one? Anybody? And if somebody says cry, I guess that's acceptable, but it's not the answer I was looking for. Bunny, you don't
well, I think the conversation, first of all, is why, right? You call and say, what are your concerns? But additionally, hopefully the buyers did decent earnest money, because I feel like when I have buyers, I tell them more earnest money is better incentive for the seller not to cancel at some point, because they're going to owe you whatever your earnest money is. And so I think, if they're not happy because of the offer they have, or, it's a conversation to understand what their concerns are. But then if it's financially, well, again, hopefully the buyers put down decent earnest money, because now you have the conversation, well, you can cancel, but here are the repercussions.
Yeah, Stacy, spot on. And this is what I enjoyed with what Bunny did. She didn't, immediately fire back at this gentleman with a, well, I'm sorry, you have a contract, blah, blah, blah. That's like telling somebody, hey, Stacy, you just need to calm down. How calm do you feel when I say that? It's one of my favorite hated statements. You just need to calm down. And firing back with the technicalities when somebody is charged up, unsatisfied, emotional, rarely, if ever, gets us where we need to land. And so what I admired about what Bunny did is she did exactly what you said, Stacy, help me understand what's going on, right? I'm not even going to buy into the, you want to terminate your listing right now. I mean, we'll get to that, but help me understand what's going on, right? And there's actually some like psychology and science behind this. Most of the time, whether it's in real estate, whether it's in relationships with your spouse or significant other or kids, the rule of thumb, the general rule of thumb is people, if they're complaining, they want to know that they've been heard, right? That's the starting point. And until that registers that they've been heard, they're going to keep doing the same thing, arguing, being emotional, irrational. So that really is, it sounds so simple, right? We all know it. We can all intellectually think it through right now. We're like, yeah, of course that makes sense. But in the heat of the moment, I don't know what happens. Something triggers in our brain And we want to, a lot of times, go to, well, you're wrong. And notice I'm pointing with a finger. This is figurative. You want to start doing this to the person. And man, that just never lands well. So after we've figured out what the issue is, I think it's appropriate, like so many things we do in our space, is to ask additional questions. So what could we do to make it better? Now, Bunny, I am gonna pick on you. Even if you do it well, and even if you ask some questions of what can happen, does that always mean the person is going to be like, oh, I feel so much better now, and forget all the irrationality, emotionality that I just expended? Does that always
No,
work? Yeah,
no, not with, and specifically not with this buyer
yeah. And so
or
I'm using
seller.
this, yeah, I'm using this example because it's so important for us, and we need to be prepared, right? And so I wanted to just talk through this briefly. It's not the main topic today, but in the category of wins or interesting things, it is something that comes up. Now, sometimes it is because the agent hasn't done something that they wanted, or this is almost always the case, proper expectations weren't set, right? If you know the definition of frustration, most people will say some version of it's unmet expectations. I expected this, you delivered that. When there's that gap, who's responsible for that gap? Primarily, I think as the pros, it's us, right? Sometimes we just gloss over things. We don't want to broach a subject because, oh, why would I want to cover that? We'll cross that bridge when it comes, if we come to it. And unfortunately, when we do get to that bridge and we haven't set the expectations, it's almost always their expectations up here, and we deliver somewhere down here, and that delta means frustration. And roughly speaking, that's the issue with this gentleman. Now, to the technicalities of the contract. There's two contracts in place. He has a contract with the company, right? And he went under contract with a buyer. So we're in this weird space now where let's take the contract between the company and a buyer or a seller, right? It's not a super technical term, but these are known as bilateral contracts. Why do we use that term bilateral? This isn't a law class where, you'd have to give me a total technical definition, but bi means two, right? It means two. Two parties have agreed to something. And as a general rule, when two parties enter into a contract, you can't then do a unilateral exit of the contract. Both parties must agree to go into the contract, and both parties, unless there is a default, must agree to exit contract. So when a seller or a buyer calls up, texts, sends an email saying, I am terminating my contract with your company, as much as I appreciate the emotion and trying to be proactive, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. Now, how we say that, how we package that up, will determine how the conversation goes from there. Do I think it's a good idea to turn around and be like, well, you signed a bilateral contract and you cannot unilaterally exit it? Yeah, that's not going to go so well. But I'm going to give you one quick version on this, so I hope you understand however you say this. And I think it's always adequate to take yourself a little bit out of the crosshairs and make it a company issue. Here's the concept. The company has X number of agents, and each agent has the ability, I call them time slots, per year to do deals, right? And we base our structures and our relationship with our agents and the business of real estate based on how many people we can work with. And so when somebody signs up with the company, they're taking a time slot, right? There's an opportunity cost. If I choose to work with buyer A, or A through K, it means I can't work with others, right? Because there's only so many hours in a day. And so when we do our job in this case, and we get the property under contract, which is what one of the main things we are hired to do, and then somebody gets a little sideways and says, I want to terminate the contract. One, cue up the whole conversation of, My opinion as a principal broker, and we talk about this as area brokers, is unless our agent has done something illegal, for sure, or unethical, there's not a lot of room for us to just say, you know what? Let's go ahead and cancel the contract. If we took that approach as a company, how many agents do you think would stick around with the company? Not so many. If I just said, Haley, you know what? You're great and appreciate all the work you're doing, but you know what? We're just going to cancel this deal that you were under contract on. Yeah, that'd last all about one transaction, and Haley would be like, peace out, Barton, right? And so that's an important part. But the other part for them to understand is we have invested in you just like you've invested in us. And so the contract, barring something illegal or unethical, is going to stand. I mean, this is a conversation I have a little more frequently than I'd like to sometimes. And that is, I don't say it that way, but that is the context of it, right? It's like, did my agent do something illegal? Well, no. Did they do something unethical? Well, no. Well, they weren't there to turn on the lights when somebody came through, a buyer came through. It's like, man, I can imagine that might be frustrating. Is that something you discussed with the agent that you specifically agreed to that they would come and do? Because most of the time, you may not know this, the buyer's agents get there early and turn on the lights, right? They want to ensure that the buyer's having a good experience. So is it possible we just didn't have an understanding of how this was to work, right? And I'm using a very oversimplified version of this, but it's important that we understand the backdrop, which is unless we did something illegal or unethical, or unless our agent says, hey, Matt, I don't want to work with this client anymore. Would you release him? Those are pretty much the scenarios. Otherwise, we've got your back and we will have these conversations with the clients. So, makes sense? Questions on that? All right. I have a couple of, let me just tell you the outline of what I want to cover today. Wanted to spend just a few minutes on stats and industry direction, and then a quick tech piece. And then I want to jump into, ironically, since we started to talk about this, the many faces of Earnest Money and actually how it touches a lot of different things, not just the REPC. So that's what we're going to cover. Let me start. I'm going to share my screen here. Just a second. All right. Okay. Yeah, I think I've done Zoom once in a while. Okay. So this is one of my favorite places to go. Y'all know this, but I'm just going to touch base since it's a new month. This is Rapid Stats, and this is the dashboard where you start out. Now listen, most of the time it shows up like this, right? It gives you today's stats. The first thing I do when I come into the screen, which you don't have to do anything, you'll land here, but just go and drop all three of these down to 365, right? Because what it does is it quickly sizes for me, and I hope you're the same with this. I want to know very rapidly kind of the size of the market, what's going on, so that when somebody asks me, hey, Matt, a lot of stuff going on in the market. What's your take? Where are we in the market right now? Whether it's a buyer, a seller, somebody just who knows somebody who's doing going to be doing a real estate transaction. I want to have multiple answers at the ready. And this is so easy to do. And this is why I drive this point home. If I did this every Monday and just came in and said, okay, Rapid Stats, dashboard, and drop these all down to 365 days, I'd know that, hey, currently versus a year ago, our listings are up 25%. Our solds are only up 5%. That means inventory is growing. And under contracts are up 13% from a year ago. So the good news is things are trending the right way, but it's not exactly flying off the shelf right now. Everybody see that? Super easy to do. Come into the dashboard, come to these three top items, drop it down to 365, and just think this through. So that during the week, if somebody says, Jenny, how's the market doing? You can say, you know what, interesting. I actually take, and this is so important. You got to have good dialogue. You gotta paint yourself as the professional. So if I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, you know what? I'm glad you asked. Not everybody does, but I actually every week spend time understanding where we are in the marketplace. Is that a good thing to say to your prospective client? Yeah, right. Means, all right, I got the right person. You know what? Most people don't know this. Our listing count is up almost 25% from a year ago. The solds have only gone up 5% from a year ago, which means inventory growing. Good to tell a buyer and a seller for different reasons. And under contracts, they're coming up. And part of that may be because of the recent movement on the Fed reducing the Fed funds rate. Now, that all took maybe a minute, minute and a half. Is it worth having that type of an answer at the ready when your buyer, your seller, your friends, anybody who knows you're in the industry asks you, because they think you're a pro, to turn around and be able to rattle that off? So I'm asking you once again, make this part of your regular routine. I don't care if it's this one. I think this is a good one because it's so easy and so fast. And if you want to have a few of these printed out, so when they ask the question, you have this, which is the same information, and it's in such a pretty graphic format. And it took me, all I did is I came down, just so I can show you, go to market summary, go over to the second one and click view. Now you can restrict it by your county. I'm currently doing the entire state, but that took 2 clicks. And I hit the print button and I print out 5 or 10 of these and I've got them at the ready. So if I bump into somebody or if I'm whatever, one of our agents, he takes this for each of the counties that he works in and saves it to his phone each month. And so he's got it right there at the ready in case somebody asks a question. He can say, you know what? I actually was just doing some research on this. Here's the information for Davis County. Here's the information for Weber County, Salt Lake County, Utah County, whatever the case may be.
And Matt,
yeah.
I do that for any listing appointment I go on to because you can get super specific with the price range and with so many different things, and the sellers love it. So
yeah.
just
isn't it crazy? I mean, seriously, Julie, how hard is this?
It's not hard.
And
you just print it off and show it to them if they want to see it.
Yeah. And if you want to drop down and say, oh, I only want Davis County, you just do this. Select all, which turns off all the check boxes, and you go to Davis County, and then click refresh over here on the right. And it will pop up Davis County's information. Oh my gosh, right? This is one of those things like you're teaching your kids like a truism in life. And for some reason, they keep ignoring it and ignoring it. Like, what the heck is wrong with you? This is so easy, right? And yet the vast majority of your peers don't even know to get here, let alone how easy it would be to utilize in making them up their game in the eyes of their SOI, their clients, and everything else. Super easy. All right, 2 more nerd points and then we'll move on. So I've already populated this because I want to show you this, but let me go here. If you go to stats and go down to market summary, okay, remember stats, market summary, midway down, it's going to pop up this. And what I did is I came over here, it will default to $50,000 price increments and we'll have all these boxes checked. I don't want all of those things. Definitely don't do the graph. It's no good, but the table's pretty cool. And to your point, Julie, especially for a listing, this is another tool. Now, this is probably more beneficial for a high analytical, or at least has some degree of analytical, but even for somebody who's an amiable or whatever, they can see the data. And so what I do is like, I'm going to show you 3 categories because it's important for you, Bunny, to know where we are in the market as we list your home, or if I'm working with a buyer to see where the inventory is and how much we're going to have to choose from. Remember what we started off with? Setting the appropriate expectations so that your people, buyers or sellers, don't get frustrated. Wow, if you did this at the front end and said, listen, most agents don't know how to do this because I'm going to paint all of you into a corner, right? Because I'm a competitor. I'm going to compete with you, right? And I'm going to be like, a lot of agents don't even know how to get to this data, but I think it's so valuable for my clients. Let me just show you. Now, we were talking about listing your home at $740,000. So here are the active properties. If we go down to that 740 range, here in, the particular county I'm in, I could do it statewide, but it usually makes more sense county-wise. And I restricted it to single family homes. I'm not throwing in condos and townhomes and other things. Well, currently, we have 63 competitors in that price point. Now, I could break this down even more minute and do it by city. Is that cool data to show your people? Yeah, it kind of is. Shows you're on top of your game. And oh, by the way, if you go up to the top, the median, the middle point, days on market on that particular price range is 54 days. What I just did there, Heidi, is I showed them, don't get too excited if we're under 54 days. That's the median, right? We're going to try and get it sold as quickly as possible, but don't come, I'm not saying it to them. I'm saying it without saying, if that makes sense, right? So don't come to me on day 20 and be like, how come my house isn't sold? Because I took the time to set the expectations with you upfront by showing you this data, right? Super easy. Stats, market summary graph, put in a few criteria, and boom, out you have this table. So now remember, this section was the actives, right? I'm going to do the same with the under contracts. Perhaps I could stream that off and say, gosh, in that same price point, 740,000, there are currently 14 under contract, right? They just saw there's 54 or whatever the number was, and only 14 are under contract. And then most importantly, I'm going to go to the solds and be like, you know what? In the past year, there's 795 that sold in your price point. That's the good news, right? But anyway, just good data for you to know as you, and again, I would not use all these data sources. Figure out who your people are, whether these type stats or this or some version, but make sure you've got at least some numbers to back up your charming personality, your cool company that you work with, and your marketing plan, right? They all weave together, okay?
Hey, Matt, sorry.
Yeah.
Real quick, just because I'm kind of on the move while I'm listening, where can I go back to this recording?
Yeah, it is on the training vault. So I'm going to show you on my screen here. If you go to remaxutah.com, brings up, go to the training vault. And if you come down here to the principal broker contract training, it'll probably be a day or two before it's actually up, but it will be here with all the others that we've done in the past. Kind of scary how many we have now. We have a real library going here.
Super.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Stacy. That's actually good information. I forget to cover that sometimes. All right. The last thing, if you're paying attention to the news, we heard that the Fed in their July 30th meeting, they actually didn't do anything, but rates have improved. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? The Fed decided to stay still on their rates, but mortgage rates have come down a little bit, right? We've all seen this. Why is that? Well, it's because the market, meaning Wall Street, the lending space, they future pace. They look at what the Fed did, but also they look at what the Fed is going to do. And I'm like, what? Do they have a crystal ball? How do they know what the Fed's going to do? Well, guess what? You don't have to be the genius to figure this out. There are sites like this. This is one of my favorite ones. It's the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, so cmegroup.com. And if you come down here, this is where you land. And if you just scroll down, it says, okay, look, our current target rate is 425 basis points to 450. And right now, some people are going, what? You're talking numbers now. You're nerding out. I don't even know what this means. It's not super important for you to know other than to know what range where the Fed currently is. So brief crash course, the Fed funds rate is what the government and big banks agree to charge each other to lend money. It's not what we see at the mortgage level, but it does have a carryover effect. Okay. Think of it as the cost of money. Okay. Roughly speaking, don't challenge me on this. I'm painting with a very broad brush. The important thing is to know the current range that the Fed is in is 425 to 450, right? Think of it as 4.25 to 4.5%. Okay. All I do is I come over here to the left-hand side. Notice it's highlighted what is the current rate, and that's what we're looking at. And then I come down to the aggregated probability. This is where you may glaze over, but it's kind of cool. Super easy to navigate. On the left-hand side is the next time the Fed is going to meet. So September 17th is the next time the Federal Reserve meets. And then they will meet on October 29th and December 10th. I don't go beyond 3 months because it's too crazy. But what I do is look at, remember, we know our current rate is this, 425 to 450, okay? And what they're saying is on September 17th, there's a 13.5% chance, based on all the knowledge we have right now, that it's going to stay at 4.25 to 4.50. But there's an 85% chance that we're going to drop a 1/4 point. Is that good to know? Yeah, that's good to know. Okay. Then it also talks about, all right, in October, so 2 meetings from now, there's a 51% chance that we will stay at that 400 to 425, but there's also almost a 50% chance that we drop another 1/4. Okay. So by year's end, high probability, right? I mean, by very definition, high probability that the Fed funds rate will be a 1/2 point lower. Is it a guarantee? No, it is not. We're playing the probability game. But when people are asking us, hey, Matt, in your crystal ball, being in the real estate space, what are rates going to do? At least I don't have to do this. I don't know. Instead, I could turn around and say, well, listen, nobody ever has a crystal ball. But I do track some things on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Just saying that's going to be like, people are like, what a nerd. I guess I ought to listen to what he has to say. And we track the probabilities on that of what the probability is of rates coming down. And pretty much by the end of the year, we're going to be a 1/4 to a 1/2 point lower on rates. That's the Reader's Digest version. That's not hard to say, right? I track probability matrices and, from the based on what the Fed is projected to do, and it looks like we're going to be down a 1/4 to a 1/2 point by the end of the year. Wow. I'm kind of vested in my craft. People are like, dang, most other agents don't know that. This is what I get from the other agents, right? I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. All right. So there's that. Does that make sense for you guys?
Mhm.
I hope so. I hope that's helpful type information. Again, it's not the end all be all, but man, the more you can fit out that information to answer the questions when they get asked is like super important. Okay. All right. I got to switch to my PDFs here. Make sure. All right. Last thing, I forgot the tech part. How many of you can use your virtual hand at the bottom, like raise your hand, or you can turn on your camera and raise your hand. How many of you know how to log into Bold Trail? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-ish.
I do.
Okay. Super important. This is like, I wrote in my notes that this isn't just getting a technology trinket, right? Some little cute little thing to have. I think it's fair to say that like no other time in the past, what we do with our tech stack is going to have a very tight correlation to how successful we are in the next year, the next 2 years. And I'm not a guy that's usually melodramatic. I don't make like hyperbolic statements. I try and be a straight shooter, and I'm trying to shoot as straight as I can with you. Why do I say this? What is the big buzz going on in every industry right now? What's the big buzz? What's that?
AI.
AI.
AI. AI. artificial intelligence. I mean, I was listening to a podcast the other morning, and it was the CEO of NVIDIA. Anybody own NVIDIA stock? If so, I want to be your friend. NVIDIA makes the GPU, the brain, that is top of the heap for all things AI. And he was talking about his company, which is worth billions and billions of dollars. And he said, every one of our engineers is now incorporating AI in their design and their work functions and everything else. Okay, well, that's cool for nerds.
4 trillion, correction, 4 trillion.
Sorry. Anyway, it's not just for every space that I track. It's not talking about AI. It's talking about how they're using it and how they're going to use it more in the future. What does that have to do with us? How many of you are like completely spun up on AI and know exactly where you're going to head in your real estate space with how to leverage AI? I don't see as many hands. Oh, I got Jenny. Jenny's got it dialed in. All right, cool. The reason why I asked
Sorry,
about
not fully dialed in, just trying to get there.
You're starting to get dialed in. Well, that's good.
Turning the wheels.
Yeah. So the reason I asked about Bold Trail is, in case you don't know, Bold Trail is basically having taken KV Core and Boomtown, two ridiculous CRMs, and they've merged them together. It's owned by a company called Inside Real Estate, which happens to be right on 53rd South in Salt Lake. Their valuation is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion. So they're like a legit company. And they are our good friends. They're good friends not only with us locally. The owner of it is practically a neighbor of Ron Snow's, but they're also super tight with Gold Nation, and they're tight with Remax. And we've sat down with their engineering team 3 times.
So what we need it costs. So
Gonna go ahead and mute that. We've sat down with them literally for 6-7 hours at a time on different days, going through all of the plans of what they're doing, what is currently in place, what's coming down the pike. And it is so amazing and so cool. And a lot of it has to do with them leveraging AI on our behalf. But guess what? None of it means jack squat if you don't know how to get into Bold Trail, if you don't have your SOI into Bold Trail. It will have no value and no benefit to you. So my last thing before we get into the rest of this is, if you have not gotten yourself oriented with Bold Trail, take the time. Every one of the offices should now have, there's a little promo going on. There's literally a bingo card sheet. I mean, I don't play bingo. I know I'm old enough to play bingo, but if nothing else, it's got on each of the bingo squares key things that you should be able to do with Bold Trail. If you don't even know what you don't know, get that list and start asking yourself, could I check this box off? Do I know how to do this? If not, right after this meeting, Erin Menard
she
does
is the one who's paying that bill. She said that she mails checks out on the 10th.
There we go. Does a training right after this on Bold Trail. The first, she does it twice a month, just like we do this twice a month, second and fourth Mondays, and hers follows mine. And it's going to be introduction and intermediate Bold Trail. And then the fourth week is a little more intermediate to advanced. So you now have the avenues available to you. Make use of them. Get dialed in with Bold Trail. Get to know, I'll apply the Pareto principle, right? The 80-20 rule. Go find the 20% of Bold Trail that's going to give you 80% of the bang for the buck. If you do that, you're still going to crush it. So make sure it's on your docket. All right. Let's move to Earnest Money. I am going to bring this up just a second. Share my screen. All right. So here is our beloved purchase contract. And of course, I have the first section highlight it because this is the section we all know, right? Everybody can see this okay? Somebody give me a head nod. Too small? I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. Okay, so we all know this section, pretty obvious that there's earnest money that's part of the contract. In legal terms, that's some form of consideration that is required to the formation of a contract or a deal. And the first question I want to ask, I've asked it before, but it's a good reminder for everybody. Who's supposed to hold the earnest money?
A trust account or a title
The
company?
buyer's brokerage account.
Okay. All right. So I heard brokerage. I heard the buyer's brokerage. I heard the title company. Those two are in fact viable options. Is it perfectly acceptable to hold earnest money at the seller's brokerage?
Yes.
Mhm.
It absolutely is. If you read your DRE quarterly newsletters, I want to say it's roughly a year and a half ago, Van Kage talked about this. And this is what I want to editorialize for a minute. Notice here, I got to rearrange the screen here. There we go. Notice here, right? It says, I have to get out of that so I can actually select. Here we go. Notice what it says here. Deposit the earnest money into the real estate brokerage trust account. Notice it doesn't say the buyer's trust account. Now listen, there's a lot of things. Maybe you've heard this story. It's kind of anecdotal. A lady was cooking a Christmas ham and her daughter's there and the mom cuts the ends off the ham, right? And the daughter's like, well, why'd you cut the ends off the ham? She's like, I don't know. My mom always did it that way. So she goes to her grandmother and says, why do you cut the ends off the ham? She's like, oh, well, back when I was doing Christmas dinners, I had a much smaller oven, so I cut the ends off so the ham would fit in the oven. And so it's a funny story. Sometimes we do things not exactly knowing why we do them. It's just kind of an established habit. And then sometimes when you take a step back and you're like, well, there was other ways to do it. I mean, I was wasting ham. I didn't even need, because my oven's twice the size now. All right, so much like that in earnest money, we have defaulted into this as an industry, right? Well, it's the buyer's money. It should go to the buyer's brokerage. And we just make an assumption that it has to go to the buyer's brokerage. It does not. This was called out very clearly in the quarterly newsletter, like I said, a year or so ago. Tangent to that, but who's responsible to make sure the earnest money is in? Buyer's agent, or the seller's agent?
Both.
No, you've heard this before, Haley. It's a good point. It's not. I mean, we sit there. I've watched this for years, not just years, decades. Where it's like, well, the buyer's agent didn't make sure the earnest money was in. It's like, okay, time out. In the REPSI, section 16 talks about buyer default and seller default, and each one of those has a component for earnest money as a remedy. So if you're representing the seller and there's a remedy available to your seller tied to earnest money, don't you have an equal responsibility to make sure that earnest money gets into a trust account or to a title company? Yeah, you do. And they made that very clear in the DRE newsletter. Both parties are not only responsible to see that it is in, but to also document that it is in. So there's the first warning shot. Get out of your old way of thinking. Think more advanced, think more thoroughly. Earnest money is a responsibility of both the buyer's agents and the seller agent. Okay, that's the first starting point. Second part of this is if you go to a title company, in the negotiation of a contract, for whatever reason, somebody says, well, there are brokerages out there who, I got to back up. As a real estate brokerage, you're required to have a real estate trust account. That's one of the rules of having a brokerage, but it does not say you have to use it. And there are brokerages, some of them happen to be discount brokerages, say we don't have the bandwidth to chase all the earnest money around. So our company policy, even though we have a real estate trust account, is that we're going to require earnest money to be held in a title company. Can they do that? Yes, they can. That's their business practice. We don't dictate how they run their business. Okay. If your client doesn't like that because the buyer's brokerage doesn't maintain a trust account, then now you know you have an option like, well, we don't want to put it at a title company, and we're going to come back to that. Why don't we rewrite the contract to say that both parties agree that the earnest money will be held at the seller's trust account? What are the downsides to holding earnest money at a title company? Are there any? Jenny.
I was going to say, both parties have to agree. You have to go through all this mess just to get the earnest money released. So it's just too messy.
That was the technical definition. You have to go through all of this mess. I don't disagree with you. Let's pull this up real quick. Here is the addendum for earnest money at a title company, right? And I've got some highlights on here from a previous training, but notice and notice at the bottom, this was not just a UAR form. This is one of the 6 documents that the DRE puts out, the DRE itself, right? Form approved by the Utah Real Estate Commission and the Attorney General. So this is their document. And one of the first things it says, aside from referencing the REPSI and who's involved, is the next section is attention, bold in caps. I think that means they want us to pay attention, our clients to pay attention. Buyer and seller advise that the title company may require through separate written instructions that both the buyer and seller mutually authorize disbursement. This is the mess you're talking about, right? Jenny, we're going to come back to that. Even if the REPSI states that no additional written authorization is required, which may result in additional delays and costs for either party to receive the earnest money deposit. So let's go back to the REPSI. The cool thing about the REPSI, and this is why we like it being held in our trust account, is there's specific verbiage in there that says without other written authorization, the brokerage can release earnest money. Now, there's an unspoken portion that says if it's contractually clear. If there's any ambiguity, we as principal brokers, or if somebody's contesting it, we can't just release it. There's process that we have to go through. Worst case scenario is if there's not a meeting of the mind and there seems to be conflicting interest of who was actually the defaulting party, what we will do, kind of as a last resort, is we will interplead the title fund or the earnest money funds to a court. That's a fancy way of saying we're punting. We're going to punt the money over to a court and let them decide. That costs us, depending on the amount, somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 or $300. We don't like to do it because we don't get that money back. But man, it can take a sticky situation off of our hands and put it to the court. Okay. So Jenny is 100% right. When we, as innocuous as it may sound initially, holding earnest money at title companies, almost every title company that I run across in the recent past has a form that you're going to sign that says, hey, just so you know, our policy is we're the unbiased third party. We don't weigh in on the legalities of things. In order to release earnest money, both parties are going to have to sign to release. So what's the problem there? Doesn't everybody play nice in the sandbox? Yeah, I think the word is leverage. Even though the defaulting party may know that they're the defaulting party, they also know that without their signature, that earnest money is going to sit at the title company until they agree, which gives them some leverage. Now, other people are like, yeah, but they can't do that because we could take them to court. Yeah, that's what they're banking on. They know how difficult it is to take things to court to get it released. That is, in fact, the leverage they're banking on. So it's not the end of the world, but I like this opening attention and the very last part that says it may result in additional delays and costs. Translation, you may need to go to court to get it, right? For either party to receive the earnest money deposits. So I would just simply say this. It's not our right, it's not our prerogative to tell people you can't do this. because you can. There's nothing illegal or even unethical about it. But what you do need to know, and it's our job under our fiduciary of reasonable care to explain to them the potential consequences. Like if we do hold it there, I mean, can you imagine $25,000, $30,000 held at a title company, and then the other side defaults and gets squirrely and won't sign off on releasing it, and all of a sudden your client has to go to court to get it? And then here's how this plays out, you guys. And then they come back and they say, Jenny, I'm picking on Jenny because she's been conversing with me today, which I highly appreciate, Jenny. How come you didn't do your job and explain to me how this could have gone? Right? And if we haven't done our job in explaining, we're going to sit there with egg on our face going, oh crap. And guess who's probably not going to be our client in the future? Why? And maybe it's not even because we were bad or did anything wrong, but the fact that we allowed them to get in that situation, that we didn't future pace them, that we didn't set the expectations of what could be, and then it became something. As much as we've been friends in the past, I've just watched this happen too many times to realize once it goes that route, if we haven't done our job in future pacing and setting expectations, it's pretty easy for them to say, you know, they'll still be nice and they'll still smile, but they're probably never going to do business with you again. So with that as a backdrop, maybe it's worth a little investment at the front end when somebody just cavalierly says, why don't we just put Earnest Money at a title company? Right? You might turn around to your client and say, I know that sounds easy. I know it sounds like it's not a big deal, but let me just tell you a couple things that could happen. And if you still want to do it, 100% we'll do it. But you need to know what could happen. That's our job. That's being a good agent and explaining to them. And equally going back and saying, so we can actually propose to the other side, since their brokerage doesn't have a trust account, we'll hold it at our trust account. Why? Because the verbiage in the REPC says, without further written documentation, the broker or the brokerage holding Earnest Money has the prerogative to release that Earnest Money. It doesn't need to get tied up in all the legalities. Okay? So super important. Notice the second portion there highlighted in kind of an orange color. Buyer and seller acknowledge that the Utah, this is like the DRE going, hey, by the way, I know this is our document, so we're going to take advantage of it and tell you we have nothing to do with this. When it goes to a title company, that's the tax commission. It's not part of the division of real estate. So we're washing our hands, and this is our disclosure to you. That they both acknowledge that the Utah DRE has no authority over title insurance companies' release or disbursement of Earnest Money deposits, so please do not file a complaint. It's not our purview. Okay? So super important for us to, keep in mind. All right. Questions so far on that? All right. I'm going to go back to the reps. Well, actually, let's take resolution of Earnest Money dispute. First of all, I hate the title of this form. I'm going to zoom in, but I love the form. I hate the title, love the form. It just when somebody reads it, resolution of Earnest Money dispute, it's just not a pleasant term, right? And most people are like, what? But here's why I love the form. Now, you can think of this either from the buyer's perspective or the seller's perspective. Let's start with the buyers. So if we're going, the seller defaulted, let's just say they just never came in and signed. Well, I'm actually going to bounce back to the REPC. Sorry for bouncing around. Going to go down to section 16. Right, and this is our default section. We should know this pretty well. But in there, whether it's the buyer's default or the seller's default, right, there are three remedies, A, B, and C. And they're pretty consistent between the two. So let's take this one. If the seller defaults, right, option A, the buyer can cancel the REPC. Okay, stop there for a minute. I've had so many times where people like, the seller didn't sign at settlement, so we want the Earnest Money. You got the cart before the horse. just because somebody doesn't sign its settlement does not cancel a contract. Are we all aware of this? The term that is used in case law at the Utah Supreme Court is the contract lives for a reasonable period of time. What is a reasonable period of time? Bunny, you're a reasonable person. What's a reasonable period of time for a contract to live after settlement has passed and the sellers haven't signed? Is it a day? 3 days? A week? A month? A year? A century?
A reasonable period of time.
I'm gonna take a guess. And I'm gonna say 3 days.
Okay.
Doesn't case law say 4 months?
This is so fun. So the case law on this one, I believe, was with Wardley back in the day. And without getting into all the particulars, if you really want to nerd out, I'll send you the case law on it. But the Supreme Court for Utah came back and said, at the time in this particular case, it was 3 weeks after settlement had been missed. And they said, no, the contract is still alive because it lives for a reasonable period of time. So I set you all up. There is no hard definition of reasonable time. That's why the courts use terms like that, because each case is going to be a little different, right? The parameters within the contract might have a determination of what is reasonable and what isn't. But we know at least this, it's at least 3 weeks based on that case law, and it could be 3 months, depending on if that was a reasonable expectation of the parties. Don't get too hung up on the duration. My point is this: I can't tell you how many agents and how many brokers I have had literally say to me, well, the contract is canceled. Well, why? Because they didn't come in and settle. Well, that's like saying the contract was canceled because they didn't provide seller's disclosures. That's like saying it's canceled because you didn't provide lead-based paint disclosure in this pre-1978 home. Is that true? No, it's not true. It creates a potential breach in the contract, but it does not cancel the contract. I know it feels like I'm splitting hairs on this, but this is a very, very important concept. Yeah, Deborah, go ahead.
So if someone didn't show up to closing, you couldn't say they didn't fulfill their duty. You couldn't put the home back on the market. Like, what would you do? I mean, I've never had someone not show up, but that's weird.
Perfect question, Deb. All right. So here's the thing. You're right. They have breached at that point. 5 o'clock, they haven't settled. They're in breach of contract. But that's just like the first domino to fall. That domino has to hit another fall, which is to actually cancel the contract. So once the buyer or the seller, whoever didn't sign, has created a breach in the contract, the next thing that is required is to actually cancel the contract, because we now know from this training and because of case law that it's not dead. It doesn't just die because there's a breach. So whoever is the non-breaching party, in this case the buyer, because they signed, they could fire off a buyer's notice of cancellation to the seller. And what would they cite? Non-performance of the seller. They didn't settle per section 24D. They're in breach. And then what the buyer has to decide is, and what are we going to do about that breach? So if we go back, I was highlighting section A, which is they can cancel the REPC, and in addition to the return of their earnest money deposit or deposits, if applicable, the buyer may elect. This isn't the only option. May elect to accept from the seller as liquidated damages a sum equal to the earnest money deposit or deposits, if applicable. So the other thing that I just love when there's a default is when the defaulting party, in this case the seller, fires back and says, well, we're just going to send back an equal amount of earnest money. Not your choice. I got 3 options as the buyer, as the non-defaulting party. I could go to option number B, letter B. Now, this is an interesting one, and this is going to be a word of caution when it comes to earnest money. Notice on section B, it says, Maintain the earnest money deposit. If you want to use option B, what has to happen? Earnest money has to stay in the trust account. Maintain the earnest money deposit or deposits, if applicable, in the trust, and sue the seller to specifically enforce the Rep C. Right? So I have this conversation all the time with agents where they're like, well, yeah, my seller just wants the earnest money. I'm like, have you explained to them options B and C? And it's scary when sometimes they're like, what? It's like, you do understand there's 3 options, right? Oh, and one of them, the middle one, requires that if your buyer wants to use it, like take them to court and sue so that they can actually get the house, they better keep that earnest money in the trust account, because once they remove it, they've actually breached the contract themselves for that option. Right? So this is hugely important. And I think a lot of times it gets missed because agents typically, not all, you guys aren't the ones, but others don't actually read the contract, don't understand what's in it and what their responsibilities are. Okay? Then the third option is C, which is, okay, go ahead and return my earnest money, right? And then pursue other remedies available at law. So we're going to sue you not to perform on the house, but we're going to sue you because we lost out on our buyer for our house. We lost out on the moving trucks. We lost out, now we're going to be 3 months down the road and rates went up. And over the life of the mortgage, that's going to be, $50,000 difference. Could they do that? Yeah, that falls under the umbrella of option C, depending on how good their attorney is and how good they can document the damages that have come about. So just remember that. Earnest money is the easy one, guys. So when somebody gives you a little blowback, when they're the defaulting party, their client's the defaulting party, and you want the earnest money and they give you some resistance, it's not a bad thing to have at the ready to say, hey, listen, can appreciate the emotions. This isn't a fun situation for any of us. You and I aren't getting paid now, but I'm trying to steer clear of a bigger problem, right? Because if you guys give us resistance on the earnest money, my clients may turn around and opt for either option B or option C. And both of those scenarios are long, ugly, and expensive. Haley, go ahead.
Matt, how does option C exclude option B?
Yeah, so the difference is, notice the difference with earnest money.
Specific performance. But you could still sue for specific performance under number.
You couldn't under number
C.
C, because the contractual term in B makes it very clear that if you're going to sue for performance, you must keep the earnest money in the trust account. If you go with option C, the very first portion says, accept the return of earnest money, which takes option B off the plate. If you go for C, because earnest money has now come back to you as the buyer, then you can't do B. You can't do option B because it requires that the earnest money stay in the trust account. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it says any other remedies available by law and specific performance.
Any other remedies, because the remedy for suing for performance is covered explicitly in item B, which explicitly requires earnest money to stay in the trust account.
Okay.
So yeah, this is important stuff, you guys, right? But I hope the takeaway for this is you really don't want option B and C if you can avoid it. Not our call. It's the client's call. It's our job to explain to them, right? But getting earnest money as a remedy is the easiest path. It's the fastest path. And I will go to this resolution of earnest money due diligence form. So if we can get to that place where everybody nods their head in the right direction and says, yes, we're going to do earnest money as the pre-agreed upon liquidated damages for default. Why is this form important? Well, look at paragraph number 1. Buyer and seller acknowledge. So it is going to require the signatures of both. That the Rep C with an offer reference date of such and such between these two parties is canceled. So there's the first thing. It's a definitive that it is canceled. I had a debate with a broker in Cedar City one time. It's like, no, you have to have a cancellation. I actually talked to attorneys who said the fact that you affirm here that it's canceled is a form of cancellation itself. But if you want to be extra clear, just have the cancellation, then do the resolution of earnest money. I'm not going to I'm not going to play legal, but it does confirm that both parties agree that it is canceled. And then what? Seller's brokerage, buyer's brokerage, the respective owners, brokers, and agents do hereby, so everybody involved, buyer, seller, their brokerages, their agents, everybody's agreeing to mutually release each other from all obligations, claims, liabilities, demands arising out of the REPC, including all addenda counteroffers and exhibits. And what? The earnest money deposit in this transaction is being held where? And then what are we going to do with it? And we're going to specify it's going to the seller, it's going to the buyer, we're splitting it, whatever the case may be. Okay, that's cool. Then we go, are there any additional extraneous terms we're going to add to it? No. And then section 3, this resolution of earnest money dispute, together with the attached exhibits addenda, constitutes the entire agreement between the parties and supersedes and replaces any and all prior negotiations, representations, warranties, understandings, or contracts between the party. Okay? It's the only claim. So once they sign off on this, they can't go to court. Okay? Once you accept earnest money as the resolution, and they sign this form, both parties are agreeing, okay. Now, Haley, to your point, could we release earnest money and still sue them? Yes, but not if you sign the earnest money resolution. So again, depends on the situation, depends who you're representing. If I'm representing a seller that, is going to, okay, yeah, I'm going to release earnest money, I may insist that you as the buyer's agent go and get an earnest money resolution dispute form signed that says, yes, we're all agreeing that you're choosing earnest money. Why? Because of this language that my cursor is on right now. We're going to release each other from any future obligations, claims, liability, demands arising out of the REPC. You can't sue me now. So I'm going to tell my seller, because my fiduciary is to my seller, if we're going to say we're not going to contest this, we're going to release the earnest money, at least let me get you some legal protection so they can't exercise option C. Is it my responsibility to tell the buyer what their buyer is signing off on? Nope. My fiduciary is to do what is in the best interest of my seller. Is having them do this illegal or unethical? Not at all. Right? So
What if they won't sign it?
well, you can still get the earnest money release, but you just don't have the protection from item C, right? Because earnest money is released.
So not signing it won't prevent the brokerage from releasing the money.
Correct. What we do internally, it's a great question, Haley, is when we get these, Karen, some of the other office managers on here, Colleen, we know our protocol is this. If there's a cancellation and somebody wants earnest money, the first thing they're going to do is make sure we have a complete file, and then they're going to get a broker involved to look at whether it was canceled the correct way, whether there was proper notice given, and if we agree with who the defaulting and non-defaulting parties are, and are we okay to release earnest money. It's a clear-cut case, right? So a simple example we were using earlier on was, did we release earnest money per the terms of the contract? Okay.
Matt?
Yeah.
You have told us that the earnest resolution of earnest money dispute, if signed by both parties, does not need to go in front of a broker, that it is good to release.
Correct. So sorry, maybe I didn't make that clear. Thank you, Colleen. What we do as a company is if we get earnest money resolution, that's a contract between buyer and seller. They've signed off on it. We're done. The money, everybody has agreed. It's contractual. It's based on their REPC between buyer and seller. We're not some like legal police. It's you can't do that. Our job is to instruct and to share the information. So Colleen is right. If the office managers get a fully executed resolution of earnest money dispute form, we're done. Whatever it says, both parties agreed to it. They got signatures on it. We're going to release earnest money to however they say it there. If we don't have that and somebody wants earnest money and they can't get a resolution of earnest money dispute form signed, then we as a brokerage are going to look at it and be like, okay, well, the seller never came in and signed. Is that a clear breach? Yes. Is there any other extenuating circumstances? No, it's that simple. Cool. Very clear for us. Buyers entitled to the earnest money. We do want them to put something in writing that says, yes, we want the earnest money, because we don't want to be guilty of robbing them of one of their 3 non-defaulting party remedies. Does that make sense? But
So
outside,
at least from the receiving party.
correct, the receiving party. They just have to give us something in writing, say, yes, we're choosing item A of section 16. We want the earnest money, our earnest money, and any money that comes from the other broker, or the seller, to come to us, and that's our resolution. So
It's just the buyer's notice of cancellation that will have to go in front of a broker.
before any of these, there has to be a clear cancellation, whether it's a buyer's notice of cancellation or a seller's notice of cancellation. We're not going to ever take, oh, we passed settlement deadlines, so just release the earnest money. So, all right, more than you ever wanted to know about earnest money. I hope that helps as you guys navigate things. Hopefully you don't have too many situations and you just get it across the finish line and get a paycheck. That would be even better. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you for being on the call. Hope you have a great week, and we will talk soon.
Thanks, Matt.
See ya.